Merci, Miigwech. And I want to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishwaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. And today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. I want to thank the elders present. I want to thank all the chiefs present. I want to thank Regional Chief Roseanne Archibald, who's right. Our first meeting was at the Thunder Bay Holiday Inn, where we sat down and worked on Cat Lake. And it was a roll up your sleeves. What can we do? Your leadership meant a great deal to me, and we were able to see things through, and I thank you very much for that. It is an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Today, I was hoping we could discuss the priorities that you and your communities have raised, things like child and family services, Jordan's Principle, and healthcare. As Minister of Indigenous Services, I've been visiting many communities and seeing firsthand how these challenges are interconnected. They're not in isolation. They're interconnected. And how they affect your lives, your communities, and your people. I also want to underline my commitment and our government's commitment to renew the relationship with First Nations in Ontario in a way that fosters respect, recognition, and real partnership. One of the most important parts of that renewed relationship is the commitment to protect the most vulnerable members of your communities, your children. There is an overrepresentation of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children in child welfare systems right across the country. The current approach has been rightly described as a humanitarian crisis. It incentivizes apprehension over prevention. Imagine that. And it does not take Indigenous culture, experiences, and tradition into account. Too many Indigenous children end up in care away from their communities, and that must stop now. Bill C-92 is one step towards reforming the child welfare system so that you can decide the best path forward for your children and for your communities. For instance, before sending a child to live somewhere else, the new bill would affirm the jurisdiction of communities to decide if another relative, an auntie, or another community member could look after the child instead. During the summer and fall of 2018 through to my first weeks as minister, we engaged representatives of First Nations, Inuit, Métis, as well as treaty nations, self-governing First Nations, provinces and territories, experts, and those who have lived through the system. We wanted to get it right. And this co-developed process builds on the work that we have already done. Together, we will ensure that your inherent jurisdiction over child and family services is recognized and affirmed. Now, we also know that funding needs to be part of that equation in order for this bill to work. That is why we have nearly doubled the annual funding for First Nations child and family services as a government. Doubled. Beyond that, we are committed to working with you to identify your long-term financial needs. An entire generation of your children and youth are counting on us, the Government of Canada and partners, to get this right. And we've got to get it right, because we cannot let them down. I will do everything I can to ensure that parliamentarians of all stripes understand this urgency, and that we will get this bill passed. Another priority area is the well-being of First Nations children through Jordan's Principle. We remain committed to honoring our obligations under Jordan's Principle, and since 2016, more than 216,000 requests for products, services, and supports have been approved. Budget 2019 builds on this commitment with $1.2 billion over 3 years to support the continued implementation of Jordan's Principle. In addition to increased funding and addressing gaps in the system, we will continue working with you to reach consensus on Jordan's Principle outside of the tribunal process whenever we possibly can. As we continue to work together to address the urgent matters of child and family services and Jordan's Principle, we must also turn our attention to the other pressing matters that are affecting your communities. I'd like to provide you an update on Grassy Narrows, which I know is top of mind for many of you, but I want to impress upon you that the Government of Canada stands with the community of Grassy Narrows. We are strongly committed to support the planning, design, and construction of this health facility. I've been in touch with Chief Turtle, and I look forward to meeting him in person to talk about how we move ahead. We will continue to advance the work on the health facility in the community, and I urge partners and the province to join us. It is imperative that we all work together to ensure that the people of Grassy Narrows get the supports they need. Similarly, with regards to housing in Cat Lake, I want to be clear. The health and safety of the community is our top priority. In March, Chief Kiwakapau and I signed a memorandum of agreement to address the community's priorities. These included investments in health, housing, and capacity building, as well as a commitment to long-term community development. And let me emphasize something that I said very clearly in the House of Commons last week. Housing money is for housing. Housing money is for housing. The memorandum of agreement that we signed does not include fees for opportunistic consultants. I am pleased to say that as of April 1st, 49 loads of building materials and 10 modular homes have arrived in that community. Both of these situations are examples of where we can and where we must do better with and for First Nations communities. And I want to thank all of those here in the room who have supported this vital work. And I know that we will continue to work together to face these challenges as they arise. On the topic of housing more broadly, it's no secret that needs are urgent and immense in many of your communities. Since 2016, the Government of Canada has committed more than $2.5 billion in housing investments nationally for Indigenous communities. But we need to do more. We need to do more, and we need to do it better. That's why just this morning, I launched the Indigenous Homes Innovation Initiative in partnership with Infrastructure Canada. This initiative provides $30 million for new builds based on creative Indigenous-led projects. We're also going to invest another $6 million for pre-development of ideas in a process that we're calling the Accelerator, to make sure that applicants are supported based on their ideas rather than the technical resources at their fingertips. That $6 million will help them get those technical resources that they need. We're interested in their ideas. And then we'll accelerate those good ideas and we'll bring them to fruition. I should clarify that we know that this initiative does not in any way solve the housing gap. Rather, what we're hoping to do is support creative, Indigenous-led housing solutions that leverage a community's strengths, which we can then build on in the future. Right now, our government is co-developing with the AFN the 10-year First Nations National Housing and Related Infrastructure Strategy, which we expect will be completed this summer. And I also look forward to working with the Ontario Chiefs on a strategy that works for this region and that is based on collaboration, innovation, and First Nations knowledge of housing. Now, we talk a lot about community infrastructure, social development, and health services, as we should. These are essential to the well-being of your communities. But when we have these conversations, we need to make sure that we save room for discussions on economic development. Healthy communities, and I mean that in the true sense of the holistic sense of the word, they have a common thread of economic sustainability and ideally prosperity. I've heard many of you say that the generations to come need hope for the future, that they need to have belief in their personal and in their communal prosperity. And so those of us here today can provide that hope for the future by working towards wealth development. We need to work together to strengthen communities by providing safe and affordable housing, dependable and robust infrastructure, and secure and prosperous jobs. Prosperous. Prosperity. That's what we need. And the marketplace, lenders, venture capitalist partners, they are waking up to the power of 1.6 million Indigenous people in Canada. 1.6 million that is expected to increase to 2 to 2.5 million by 2036. Since 2006, the Indigenous population has grown at 4 times the rate of non-Indigenous Canadians. It is the fastest and the youngest population in Canada. And according to a 2011 TD Economics Special Report, the Aboriginal market in Canada, as they called it, was expected to sit at $32 billion by 2016. But leaders in the sector, like Carol Ann Hilton of Indigenomics, believe that this number could be as high as $100 billion. There are right now more than 43,000 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in Canada who are business owners. And we want to see a lot more. A lot more. Prosperity means control. It can mean freedom. It can mean greater independence. It can mean real self-determination. And I know that many of you in this room are ready. This is the part of the speech that causes some people who work for me in the room to get a little nervous because I don't look at the iPad any longer. I want to speak to you, and I mean this in the kindest sense of the word, with pride. I want to speak to you politician to politician. I have a keen understanding of the importance of representing your constituencies. I also have a keen understanding that it's important that we develop a relationship. I haven't been in the job for very long, as many of you know. And there's been all sorts of politics in Ottawa, as many of you know. The first thing I want you to know is that nothing has kept me from the work. Nothing. The media may be very well distracted. And the media may be following this story and not other important stories. Many of you may remember President Obed's interjection in Iqaluit when the Prime Minister and I were there with him for the apology in Iqaluit. The national media came, and their questions were really just about Ottawa politics. In fact, that's what they were all about. And President Obed took the mic and said that he felt disrespected and that people there felt disrespected. And that while many in the media talk about the importance of reconciliation and the path towards reconciliation, sometimes they just get caught up in a story. That story has not distracted me 1 minute from the work that's before me. And I know it's an election year, and I can tell you that has not distracted me 1 moment from the work ahead of me. There'll come a time when we'll campaign, and there'll come a time when we'll be campaigning all the time. But I, perhaps maybe because I'm a newbie at this, because I'm a freshman politician, I'm actually naive enough to think that I will be judged on the work that I do. And I will work until I have to campaign. And then I will campaign on the work. So you have my 100% intention. And you have my heart. Many people know me, I know, from Canada AM, and I was very fortunate for 10 great years on that show. It allowed me to explore many issues in detail. But it wasn't really the plan. I worked in the Justice Ministry for the Minister of Justice for 3 years and sat at 2 tables. I'd done my undergraduate thesis on the Innu, Labrador Innu, and how they were politically mobilizing in order to accelerate their table. And then 3 years I spent time at their table and at the table for the Labrador Inuit. Then I went to the Premier's office, and I continued working at those 2 tables. And then when I did my master's degree, I did it on the marginalization of Indigenous peoples in Canada. And the reason why all of this caught my interest was because I grew up in St. John's till I was about 12 years old. And I joke with people that growing up in St. John's, my idea of diversity was Protestants. There's not a lot of diversity in St. John's. Increasing, though, which is great. But there wasn't when I was growing up. But when I moved to Goose Bay, Labrador, everything changed. The first people I met when I got off the boat were the Innu leadership. My dad introduced me to them because he had worked with them. And we were moving to Labrador because my dad had a new job. And after that, I went to school with Innu and with Inuit and with Métis. And I often say that Goose Bay, Labrador was the most sophisticated place I could have ever grown up. It introduced me to things in the world that I and many Southern Canadians don't get to see. But it moved me, and it changed my life. It introduced me to the richness of Indigenous cultures, of different Indigenous cultures. But it also opened my eyes to the challenges ahead. And so that's what I studied. That's what I worked at. And then CTV, for whatever reason, wanted to hire people who had absolutely no experience or education in television, and they gave me a job. And I didn't want to do it, but my mother said, for God's sake, just go to Toronto for a year and see if it works out. Well, it worked out. And I had a great career. But I'm back where I started. I'm back with where I wanted to be. I wanted to be exactly in this room with you, working with you. That was my intent all along. You have my commitment. You have my heart. My heart is open. My mind is open. Canada AM teaches you how to talk, but boy, I tell you, if you really want to be a good interviewer on a national television show, you better be a darn good listener. And I am. And I look forward to working with you. I know we've got many challenges ahead. And I know in this government, we've only got a few months. But we will continue to act in the long term. And we will continue to work with you side by side, finally, the way the Government of Canada should have always acted. We are ready and we are with you, and I am committed to you. Thank you very much for your time.